Elden Ring has a lot of bosses, so many that I haven't even found or fought all of them yet. But I have found and fought all of the legend bosses, the bosses who give us remembrance upon their defeat. So I figured I'll try and rank those 15 remembrance bosses from worst to best, also known as how much I like them. That's ultimately what it is. It's a more grammatically correct way of saying least to most favorite, which is incorrect to say. So I'll be taking into account not necessarily just mechanics or difficulty, but also other things such as visuals, soundtrack, lore, build up to the fight, all of those things that play into my personal enjoyment. Now, a few disclaimers before we begin. You'll have to forgive some of my filthy, bloody slash spam with some of the later bosses. The Godskin duo traumatized me into thinking that I should just use that all the time because it does a fuckload of damage. And it does kind of work, but it severely hampered my playstyle, so you'll have to forgive me a little on some of that. And the other thing is that the video quality for a lot of the footage is not the best. I streamed the game directly from my PS5, and they do not really have any options in regards to bitrate, so a lot of the footage looks a little grainy, but I would rather use my footage from my own experiences than go and steal it from some other people. So all the footage you'll be seeing is from my own playthrough, which I stream the entirety of on my channel. So without any further ado, let's get into the 15th spot on the list. In my opinion, the worst of the Remembrance bosses, and one of my least favorite bosses in the game. Fuck the Fire Giant. I hate this guy. He has some of the worst combinations you could have for pretty much any boss fight. He has a gigantic health bar to match his size. He is an absolute tank. Most of your attacks really do not do that much damage unless you have some kind of bleed build, which I ended up making kind of one after the fact. But the other thing is most of his attacks one or two shot you because he's a fucking giant using a giant plate or pyromancy to attack you. So not only does the fight take a very long time to actually get through, it could be ended at pretty much any point during the entire fight if you're not extremely careful, or, if you get caught on the environment while running around on torrent, or if the camera gets all funky like it tends to do and you can't really tell where you're going or what attack the giant's doing, or the hitbox gets really weird when you're standing underneath him during his second phase where you're supposed to be safe, but then you just die instantly anyway. Strange happenings that make for a very unenjoyable fight. Did not really care for this guy at all. A slog. Not a good fight at all, in my personal opinion. Did not enjoy it whatsoever. The one upside to the fight is that it has really cool visuals. The transition into the second phase is pretty sick in just about any way you could describe it. It's pretty cool. And the second phase, at the least, I would say is much easier than the first. But I don't think that really makes up for all of the unfun problems that there are in the first phase. And also, I just have a bad taste in my mouth over this boss because it was the first bad chunk to a bad night, thanks to the Godskin duo. Anyway, let's move on to the next boss. At 14th place, I have Renala, the Full Moon Queen. The first phase of her boss is a more interesting version of the crowd fights that we've gotten quite a few of in FromSoft games. It's very similar to Deacons of the Deep in that you have to go around and target specific identified mob enemies in order to expose Renala and attack her. Certainly a little more interesting than most of the mob fights. And in the second phase of the fight, you get an actual boss fight against a magic caster. She does a lot of spell attacks, most of which are somewhat easy to dodge. The trickiest part of it is when she starts to use summons of her own, summoning various enemies, including dragon bosses, which was quite difficult to deal with at first, until I was reminded that summons are a thing. This was the boss that really reminded me that I should be using those. In addition to that, very nice arena. The visuals for it are very good. Fighting someone on a giant, placid body of water with a huge full moon in the background is very nice. However, the reason Renala ranks this low is because she doesn't really do much for me personally. The arena's nice. but I think there are nicer ones, and I don't find her to be particularly interesting as a boss in general. She's fairly well designed, not too difficult, fairly enjoyable to fight, but in general, she's just kind of there for me. In 13th place, I have Astel, Natural Born of the Void. This was a pretty neat boss to find when going through Ronnie's questline. I had no idea that I was going to be running into him where I did. So, as you can imagine, running into a weird alien bugworm thing in an underground cavern was a little bit surprising. Certainly something of a pleasant surprise because he ended up not being too difficult, but that's not a problem. Because his moveset is very cool. The visuals for this fight are absolutely outstanding, in addition to his very strange alien design. Most of Astel's attacks are simply delicious visual treats for the eyes. All of the space imagery with his attacks, warping space to teleport, shooting big laser beams, summoning meteors, all of it is very, very cool, and he makes for a pretty fun secret boss to find if you don't really realize that you're going to be stumbling upon him. However, once again, he was a very easy boss, and this may have had to do with the fact that I was very tired and not in a great mood from fighting the fire giant and then running into Godskin Duo. This fight didn't really make me feel much either, but still a pretty cool fight overall. In 12th place, I have the Regal Ancestor Spirit. This one could probably be swapped with Astel. I feel like both of them are pretty close to each other in terms of my overall opinion on them. I'm a little disappointed that the Regal Ancestor Spirit is basically a reskin of the normal Ancestor Spirit. I like it for pretty much the same reasons that I like Astel. Cool visuals, I like the design, the big ghost deer, whatever the hell it is. It's a pretty cool vibe. And its moveset is fairly interesting, albeit very easy to deal with. However, the one thing I think that probably puts the Regal Ancestor Spirit over Astel is the soundtrack. It has a fucking didgeridoo in it. This is one of, if not the most unique boss soundtrack in pretty much any FromSoft game. I can't think of any other boss that has an OST quite like this one. It was a very pleasant surprise to hear. I greatly enjoyed it. It fits the vibe of the fight very well. But other than that, don't really have all that much to say about it. In 11th place, I have Malenia, the Blade of Miquella. I have no idea if this is going to be a controversial placement for her or not, considering how iconic she is, and how, in theory, she's a really good boss. I guess you could say she's kind of like Ishin, in that she's arguably the hardest boss in the game. You could also say she's more like the Demon of Hatred, and that she is a secret challenge. She's very clearly intended to be the ultimate challenge for players of Elden Ring, for those of us who really want to challenge our skills and really hate ourselves because we spend hours throwing ourselves again and again at a boss that absolutely fucking annihilates us. She has an excellent design. You already know it. Everyone recognizes the Valkyrie cyborg woman. She's basically the mascot of the game. There's a lot of build-up to eventually reaching her and fighting her. We hear references to her a lot, especially in Caelid, in regards to her fight against Radahn, and how apparently she was strong enough that he wasn't even able to straight up beat her in a fight, which is nuts, because we saw how strong Radahn is. And the OST is absolutely fantastic. They used it for Margit in the network test because I guess they just couldn't wait to show it off to people. So why do I have her ranked so low on this list? Well, I mentioned earlier that she's pretty much the ultimate challenge in the game. And I would say that she's so challenging that she's actually too difficult for me to genuinely enjoy fighting her. She's so tough that I haven't actually beaten her. I have fought her for several hours and have not managed to beat her, which is not necessarily a problem in itself. There were several bosses that I took multiple hours to beat, but the problem comes from a few aspects of her boss fight. The first one is that she heals anytime she attacks you. This is clearly just meant to encourage being very aggressive, but also trying to dodge attacks basically you want to be an absolute master at the combat and not getting hit. So I don't have much of a problem with that in general. It's basically a race to try and out-damage her while also avoiding being hit. That's fine, that's neat, that's something you would kind of expect for a big challenging boss. Not necessarily the healing, but you would expect some very challenging mechanic to deal with. The problem for me personally comes from this one move that she has, which I have dubbed the anime bullshit, in which she leaps up into the air and then does 3 sets of flurry attacks that pretty much always kill you. I think I have dodged out of the way of it just barely, maybe twice, having fought her dozens of times. And I would also say probably at least 2/3 of my deaths so far against her have been because of that move specifically. I also call it anime bullshit because I do think it is actually bullshit. It's an attack that I really cannot reasonably figure out how to get out of the way of. I guess you maybe have to try and dodge past her, but it also seems like if you're underneath her, she just moves down on top of you, and she also moves around during each of the attack flurries. So the only real thing you can do is run away, but she moves so fucking fast each time she moves between one of the flurries that she catches up with you eventually, and unless you have like 99 points into vigor, you're probably going to die in one of those flurries unless you start spamming the dodge button. An attack that is pretty much almost a guaranteed death is not fun at all. I think I would probably like this fight a lot more if they got rid of just this one attack. Some of the other stuff that they add into her second phase when she becomes the Goddess of Rot adds Scarlet Rot effects, which is still not as bad as the anime shit because those attacks are pretty well choreographed and you're able to dodge out of the way of them with relative ease. Yeah, this boss is basically just turned into me and my Mimic tier trying to stun lock her into a corner to kill her as quickly as humanly possible that she can't pull off any of her moves. That seems to be the most viable strategy when fighting her, and personally, it's not a very fun strategy. I don't feel like I'm trying to learn how to fight a boss so I can overcome it. I've seen pretty much everything she can do. I have a general understanding of how it all works. And what I've gleaned from that is, I should stun lock the boss in the corner and not let it do a fucking thing, because if it does at least a few of those things, well, guess I have to try again. Not a very fun challenge for me personally. I don't know what you guys might think. In the number 10 spot, I have our final boss, Radagon of the Golden Order, and the Elden Beast. The build-up to this fight is absolutely tremendous, especially the opening cutscene. It's just very cool when the intro music starts playing once Radagon strikes his pose. It's very cool. And the visuals for this phase are very awesome as well. The effects left by Radagon's hammer pretty much every time he does an attack are really, really cool. Now, there is one thing in general that I really don't like about this phase, and that's the obnoxious AoE shit. A lot of bosses in this game have AoE aspects to their attacks. I guess that's probably for trying to manage summons, but a lot of them are just really annoying. Especially some of Radagon's, in which the timing for dodging them varies based on how far away from the boss you are. So it becomes not even much of a sound cue thing, which you're ultimately kind of able to do with a lot of the bosses, especially since they have delayed attacks. Don't be trying to dodge based on what you see, and instead try to dodge based on what you hear. They're very annoying. He has this one thing where he leaves like a lightning trap on the ground, and that's pretty obnoxious, especially when he stands in it for a bit, so you can't really do anything to him. Very annoying. But we get a very nice cooldown from Radagon in the second phase. The Elden Beast, a giant, weird galaxy dragon fish thing with a sword that looks like it's made out of amber or something. It's pretty cool. The boss arena is perhaps the prettiest we've had in any fight from a Souls game, fighting on a placid sea of infinity surrounded by all of the other Erd trees that I assume have been planted on other planets. The moveset of the Elden Beast is generally much easier to manage than Radagon's, although there are a few attacks that you really need to be worried about. It does a few really crazy slash attacks that have waves and ground shock waves that I haven't quite figured out how to dodge just yet, and it has this one tracking, spinning orb thing that's very annoying. But most of its other attacks are very well cued. You're able to tell when they're coming, you understand how to dodge them, they're very satisfying to dodge. Overall, the fight, with its visuals, its soundtrack, are a pretty great way to cap off this absolutely outstanding game. In the number 9 spot, I have Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy. Oh my god, is this a good gimmick fight? It is. Holy shit. It only took them like 13 years, but they finally figured out how to do a good gimmick boss fight. And it seems like the primary key to that is don't just give you a weapon with a weapon art that like 5 or 6 shots the boss. Instead, make it so that all of the attacks on the weapon are special, so you pretty much just have to normally fight the boss with a special weapon. Rykard's design is really creepy and cool. It's one of my personal favorites in the game. Flow of the fight with dodging all of the snake attacks in the first phase, and then all of his big sword attacks in the second phase, and then using those openings to get a variety of attacks is absolutely tremendous. I love the ebb and flow of this fight. Looking for openings in which you should do normal attacks or heavy attacks, openings to do the weapon art attacks. It's really nice. And the second phase of this fight really impresses me in terms of how it forces the player to act. This fight took me about 3 hours to beat in one stream. I think in total it took me about 4 hours to beat him. And a lot of my deaths came about in his second phase because of his big fury mode in which, well, everything just gets absolutely fucking insane. You're trying to dodge about a dozen things at the same time, and it's extremely overwhelming. And if you wait long enough, he'll do it again, and you'll probably die the second time. However, on my winning attempt against Rykard, I realized something. He doesn't do that as long as you stun him regularly enough. So like any boss, if you get too greedy and you start attacking all the time, you're going to get hit by attacks because you're not going to have time to dodge out of the way of them. But at the same time, if you're too passive and are only waiting for the big openings to land big attacks against Rykard, well, you are shit out of luck because he's going to go into his fury mode and you're probably going to die. So it strikes a very fine balance of simultaneously punishing both greed and passivity. It's pretty cool. And I have to say, the feeling of triumph and extreme relief and heart palpitations that I was feeling upon beating Rykard after sitting down and fighting him for 3 hours is pretty incomparable. I suggest going and watching when I did that on stream. In the number 8 spot, I have Godric the Grafted. He's probably the first of the demigods most of you will fight. He was certainly the first one I fought, and I think he makes a very cool and fun introduction to these very powerful bosses. He's a very tough but fair challenge. Most of his attacks are very well telegraphed so you know to expect them, but he also does a lot of those delayed attacks that we see a lot of, so it prepares you for dealing with those. He also leaves you plenty of openings for attacking him. The only move of his that I'd say is questionable in how well it's telegraphed and then in such its fairness would be the whirlwind thing he does around himself. It seems like he just kind of starts it out of nowhere. I haven't been able to really notice any wind-up to it. He just kind of does it, and if you're standing right next to him, you get damaged. Though they do give you plenty of time to dodge out of the way of the second one. I find it a little questionable if they give you enough time to recognize and dodge out of the way of the first, but, you know, other than that, pretty much fine. And of course, phase 2 of this fight, batshit insane in the best ways. A man cutting off his own big gross hand to then slap a dragon head on there is pretty fucking nuts. It goes to show just how batshit insane Godric is and how really out there some of the things in this game are going to get. And then Phase 2 gives plenty of other very well telegraphed attacks and plenty of other openings for those that are able to recognize and take advantage of them. Overall, a very fun and satisfying fight, and a very good start to the Remembrance bosses. In 7th place, I have Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. I knew as soon as they revealed the art for this giant Viking man with his lion stand and kept putting him everywhere, there was no way in hell that we were not going to be fighting this guy in some way, shape, or form. And I kind of got what I expected when we fought his ghost earlier on when we were first approaching Morgoth's boss fight. But of course, I knew this boss seems really sudden and not very strong for someone who's supposed to be the first Elden Lord. It's also very clearly only a one-phase boss. So, seems like this may be preparing us for something we face in the future, and lo and behold, I was right once again, as we face Godfrey as our penultimate challenge before reaching the final boss of the game. He's the last man standing in our way, testing us to see if we're worthy of becoming the Elden Lord. Literally, he wants to see if we're worthy for it, because he wants that title as well. He's come back to get his shit. The ex-husband is back, and he is not going to be letting anyone else get to his stuff. So we're going to have to fight our way through him. Naturally, the first phase of the fight is pretty much identical to the version of him that we fight earlier on in the game, with a few other things added in, mostly the giant ground explosion. So generally, people should be very well prepared for this fight. I know I certainly was. Things get very crazy in Phase 2, in which you think that his lion stand is going to materialize, but instead he grabs the thing and rips it open for some reason, and then reveals his identity as Chieftain of the Badlands, Horalu, the one tarnished from the intro cutscene that we have not run into, unless you missed a couple of them. And this just gets absolutely batshit insane. The man starts pulling out fucking wrestling moves. The dude is body slamming you from like 100 feet up in the air. It's absolutely fucking bonkers. It's blood pumping. It's a really damn good time. I really enjoyed fighting Godfrey, and I think he makes an excellent final test to prove that we're ready to move on to the final boss of the game. In the number 6 spot, I have Mohg, the Lord of Blood. This guy's mostly here just because I like him. I just think he's really neat. I think he makes for a very fun and cool reward to a lot of secret finding. The actual steps involved in finding this guy are kind of wacky. I had a lot of fun going through those steps on stream, listening to the directions of people in my chat. It was a lot of fun. And getting to fight a cool, moderately challenging, fun boss was pretty nice. Not to mention the actual kind of premise for fighting this dude is pretty wild, which I'm already a big fan of. You fight a demonic goat man in a burning pantheon under a false subterranean night sky. Also, while there's like a dead god and a weird cocoon behind you. I don't know, it's pretty crazy, which I'm a big fan of in general. His moveset in general is pretty cool. I like the bleed fire. I don't want to even think about how that works logistically, but it's neat. I suppose you can use Mohg's shackle to restrain him, but I completely forgot that I had that, so I never even bothered using it. I suppose you could probably use that to stop him from doing the instant bleed attacks as opposed to just chugging through them. Overall, I just like him. I just like Mohg. I think he's a cool guy. I like him a lot. In the number 5 spot, I have Dragon Lord Plasudasax, another fun secret boss. There are a lot of those in this game, actually. I think like 6 or 7 of the Remembrance bosses are secret bosses. That's pretty crazy, actually. It's very neat to fight a two-headed dragon for the first time ever in a FromSoft game. It's pretty neat. Not to mention his moveset in general is pretty fun. The teleportation makes things pretty wild. I really like his lightning claw attacks, especially the one where he dashes down from the sky. It's very intense. I dodged it for the first time and thought I was going to have a heart attack because of how sudden it was. It was very fun. In general, the dragon bosses in Elden Ring are really good, and I would say that Plasudasax is one of the best out of those. However, there was one unfortunate thing that happened in this fight. He broke. I don't know what it was, the boss glitched out. He was down to like a fifth of his health or something, and he just stopped doing anything. I've heard from some other people that this has happened to them as well, so I think this may just be a general glitch. I don't know if this has been patched out in the most recent update that's come out. Hopefully they do fix it, because this is one actual boss that I do enjoy fighting legitimately, as legitimately as I can, using Mimic Tear and spamming Bloody Slash. So ideally the next time I fight him in a future playthrough, we'll be able to see it to the end the right way. In the number 4 spot, I have Star Scourge Radahn. I really enjoy this fight, mostly because it kind of feels like Burnt Ivory King 2 Electric Boogaloo, and if you know me, you know I fucking love the Burnt Ivory King. I think going down to face a boss with an army of NPCs going with you is a very cool feeling, and we basically get that again with Radahn here, although instead of bringing some NPC knights that are like reskinned enemies, you're bringing actual NPCs with you, many of whom you've maybe encountered earlier on, notably Blyde and Alexander. Patches can show up, but I guess as soon as he realizes what you've summoned it into, he just nopes out, which is pretty funny. The guy is pretty much an MMO raid boss in a Souls game, which is pretty cool. Almost every fight is kind of intended to be sort of a 1v1 duel, so going up against a guy who's so strong that you need an entire party of champions to defeat is really awesome. It's just really, really cool. And the arena you fight him in is extremely badass to match that. The Wailing Dunes, a little island desert filled with the ruins of the Shattering and the battle between Radahn and Malenia that ended up ruining him. His moveset is very crazy, which is fine considering you have such a big arena to move around in, and you have Torrent to avoid most of his attacks, and a lot of NPCs to take his aggro for you. Fighting him is just pretty insane in general, especially when he goes into phase 2 and leaps up into the air so he can crash back down to Earth like a fucking meteor. Like, it's insane. It's absolutely fucking wild. Then he does this big, like, sonic spinning attack thing that's terrifying because he's a giant man on a tiny horse speeding towards you at like 100 miles an hour. Did I mention the tiny horse? I should also mention that from a lore perspective, Radahn is a humongous Chad, learned gravity magic just so he can keep riding his tiny horse. That is quite possibly one of the most adorable things I have heard in any FromSoft game. So he just earns a special place in my heart just for that. This fight is absolutely fantastic. It is one of the most interesting and well-designed that FromSoft has ever made, in my personal opinion, and I think he's one of the best things to come out of this game. In the number 3 spot, I have Lich Dragon Fortisax, yet another secret boss. This one you find through a secret area that you find behind a secret area, and it's kind of a secret boss you find behind another boss in said secret area you find behind another secret area. It's a relatively hidden boss. I don't think quite as hidden as... Nah, yeah, maybe he may be more hidden than Mo. Fighting a zombie dragon in a dead demigod's dream is a pretty wild premise, and one that I'm a big fan of, especially because Fortisax is a very good dragon boss, quite possibly the best FromSoft has ever made, even better than Midir, which was already kind of the peak, and I think there are a few reasons for that. All of his attacks are very well telegraphed, so you can generally tell what he's going to do, and a lot of them are very satisfying to dodge, especially the giant flying lightning greatsword, which is just so fucking cool. In addition to all of that awesome stuff, this is not an endurance fight, which, as I mentioned earlier, I don't particularly enjoy. He has a pretty reasonable amount of health, so you don't really have to worry about spending 20 minutes fighting him only to get one-shotted by a giant plate attack or something. In addition to that, He is large enough so that he's imposing, but not so big that we have a bunch of janky camera shit like we got with Nadir or various other giant bosses, especially one mentioned in this video earlier. Overall, Fortisax is just a visual treat. The red lightning on a zombie dragon is tremendous in a pretty cool looking arena. He's a satisfying challenge and a very fun find to reach while going through a bunch of secret areas. In the number 2 spot, I have Malekith the Black Blade. Just so you know ahead of time, number 1 and number 2 are honestly probably interchangeable. I love both of these fights a lot. However, I do think the number 1 spot has a couple things that put him just a little bit above Malekith. This guy is super fucking badass. He is probably the coolest character in the entirety of Elden Ring. At least, he's certainly one of the coolest characters that FromSoft has ever put in one of their games. Phase 1 is a cool Gronk clone. I checked, literally they have the same exact model. Gronk even has the death amulet on his hand, which maybe suggests something? I don't know. I don't know if that actually suggests something or if they just reused the asset. He's moderately difficult in the first phase. Some of his attacks are fairly easy to dodge, but he has a few ranged attacks, especially some AoE follow-up things that are a little bit difficult to dodge if you're getting a bit too greedy and don't expect them. Overall, Phase 1's neat, but not really too remarkable. Phase 2 is quite possibly the sickest shit ever, in which the Beast Clergyman says, "O death, become my blade once more," stabs himself in his hand amulet, and pulls out a giant black sword while his cloak burns away and reveals his black armor and white bestial mane as he reclaims his title of Malekith the Black Blade, wielding death as his weapon. That is so fucking cool, I still cannot believe it. Now, Phase 2 is pretty crazy as he starts doing a bunch of flips and spins and shit all over the place. Gotta have those delayed attacks. Delayed attacks for days, follow-up explosions, anime shit that's not unreasonable because it's after he lands for a second, so you know to back away from him before he does it. And also, his attacks drain health from you after you get hit by him, so you do have an opportunity to heal. However, you do have to be extra cautious of his attacks. Overall, in terms of vibe, visuals, and gameplay, Malekith is most certainly one of my favorite bosses in the entirety of Elden Ring. In the number 1 spot, I have Morgott the Omen King. The build-up to the reveal for this fight was fantastic. After we beat Margit for the first time, and he shared some words with us about never relenting and not forgetting us, it was probably pretty clear that the dude was going to be coming back again later to fight us. We actually encounter a wandering enemy version of him outside Leyndell that attempts to attack us. And then, finally, after making our way all the way up as close as we can get to the Erd Tree, in the throne room, the audience hall, we encounter the Veiled Monarch of Leyndell, who at the time we thought is Margit, who walks down the stairs, reminisces on all of the demigods that once sat here, and then scorns them all for being traitors before burning away his cane to reveal his true weapon and his true name, Morgott, the last of all kings, the Omen King. So the setup for this fight is already pretty fantastic. There's a bit of secrecy, you kind of expect that Morgott may be Margit, and also it's kind of a grudge match, because more likely than not, Margit killed the shit out of you the first time you fought him outside Stormveil Castle, so you probably don't mind getting a chance to beat his ass once again, though he's probably going to kick your ass a little bit as well. His moveset is absolutely fantastic. It's a great evolution on Margit. He has most of his moves from that first fight with some additions added in. His throwing knives are now 3 throwing knives. He has some more weapons now, like the giant spear that he can charge at you with or throw. He has summon swords that he calls down from the sky. And in Phase 2, he adds in some more shit after doing a big, juicy body explosion, uh, such as buffing his sword to do blood attacks, I guess. It's really cool, and in addition to that, Margit is a very interesting character as well, I guess I should say Morgott. It seems like Morgott is his real name. We get some various things implied from his dialogue during the fight about his curse staining the thrones, it being such a shame that he cannot bear, and some other information in regards to him being an omen. That's all very interesting. When I get around to doing some of my Elden Ring lore videos in the relatively near future, Morgott is definitely one of the characters that I am most interested in talking about. So, look forward to those. And with that, that's pretty much all I have to say for my ranking of the Remembrance bosses in Elden Ring. What did you guys think? What are your personal rankings of the bosses? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like. It helps boost us up in the algorithm. And if you look forward to seeing some more Elden Rings in the relatively near future, you should definitely subscribe so you don't miss any of those. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Until next time, take care.